everybody, this is Kodak here, and it's time to follow up on the Showmanship video, and this one might be a bit of a long one because I think that I and a lot of people lost the plot on what the video was about. Now, specifically, I think a lot of people lost the plot, and myself included, because I spent a whole bunch of time talking about Bionicle without really explaining why I was talking about Bionicle. Forgive me, these toys are old. But the point I was trying to make, and some of the best advice I ever got as a student was to, get to the point. Like, you're taught how to write essays in like high school and stuff like that, and the thing that the teacher always insists on telling you is that you need to build up to your conclusion. No, I had one professor who was like, I've graded so many of these things, get to the point, and that's how you get an A from me. So that is an important lesson I've learned, but at the end of the day, the reason I wanted to talk so much about showmanship is the harsh truth is, when you're out there developing a card game, unfortunately, you are not special, and the vast majority of people are going to only see the finished product, the thing that you show them. They're not going to know about all the hard work and investment that went into it. The people who are like really curious, who want to learn more about the game, study game design, want to become like really big super fans of your game, they're probably going to look into more information about how you made it, but for the most part, people are going to be looking at what you have on offer. And in a world of relative equals, it's the one that puts on a better show that wins out. At a convention, if you have two games right next to each other, both of them have had like an equal amount of, polish and effort put into them. They both have like the same sort of complexity and mechanics and fun factor. The one that shows up with like a picture of a hot babe, like on a huge banner, is going to draw way more attention than the one that doesn't. And that is the importance of showmanship. It's convincing people to give your game the time of day before they even know whether or not they think it's good. And really well done showmanship will not only convince them to take a look, it will convince them to stay. That is the importance of it. That is the thing that I think got missed the most in my discussion on Bionicle, is that the point is that as far as like an actual toy goes, compared to things like Robo Riders, which came out before, it is not a terribly remarkable toy by LEGO standards. It is one of a cadre of LEGO toys that were a bunch of Technic pieces that form into a bunch of little, like, robots that come in a variety of colors and can be combined together into a larger robot. That did not start with Bionicle. That didn't even start with Robo Riders. I mean, even the fact that Bionicles ship in canisters is not something special. Robo Riders had that too. In fact, LEGO had, like, a phase where everything they made came in some kind of canister. Like this is how they distributed their small sets, basically from like Throwbots and Robo Riders, pretty much into halfway through Hero Factory, where they kind of ditched the concept altogether. But the point is, it's not the LEGO construction, it's not the actual toy itself that makes Bionicle special, it's the added work that went into it. They didn't just say, design 6 cool looking robots and just kind of stop. To go back to what I said in the actual video, Bionicle, they went the extra mile. They gave these characters, a history. They gave them goals. They gave them personalities. Importantly, they gave them chemistry, which is something that I think a lot of like writing, that they like, we have to have like a cool, like an appealing cast of characters. So take all these traits and write them down. A lot of people forget that chemistry is a really important part of that as well. That is, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy are all about, how they interact with each other and other people. But it's because they put so much more effort into giving Bionicle, like, a world, a story, to make the characters interesting on their own, to the point where there's a decent amount of mystery. There's plenty of room to speculate on what could happen, what these characters can do, in ways that Robo Riders never really did. And I'd argue Hero Factory didn't really do that either. I do not see nearly the level of admiration for Hero Factory the way we get it for Bionicle, even though Hero Factory is, a YouTube generation, thing, YouTube, Netflix generation with easy access to everything. Before I move on, I do, however, want to talk about why I brought up Bionicle 2015. So, Bionicle 2015 is another example of, companies taking something popular and, trotting it out, because like, hey, people love Bionicle, let's bring out the Bionicles and people will love us. And here's the thing, is these sets from 2015 like I said before, they look fantastic. Like if I went to somebody in 2005 and said, "Hey, this is Bionicle 10 years from now," they'd be like, "Hey, that's pretty legit." This is, I believe, like their last gasp at doing construction figures, because they went from Hero Factory basically to this, and then basically they haven't made any construction figures since. But these do look very good. The problem was that they gave it about the same amount of care as Robo Riders. Like, they understood that Bionicle was something that people liked. They understood how to do the appealing look of something that looked like Bionicle. Like I said, those of us who saw these figures, we were like, yeah, that's definitely Bionicle. I like it. The problem was it fell apart on the execution of all of that other stuff. Things like personality, chemistry, stuff like that. Like the example I use in the video is Pohatu. In the original story, Bionicle, Pohatu is this cool bro that you just want to hang out with. He kicks soccer balls and has fun all day. Meanwhile, the new Pohatu, they like tried to simplify it. Like, oh, rocks are, they're hard and coarse and get everywhere. So let's make Pohatu like this hard and gruff guy. And, they went like the easy path on the quick and easy path, the dark side are they, to defining a character who's based on rock, rather than making like a character that, sounds like something cool. They just kind of made him gruff. Like Kopaka. Kopaka is my favorite character because he has like the character archetype, one of the character archetypes that I absolutely love the most is that outwardly he seems like this cold and aloof guy, but in reality, nobody cares more about the situation happening than Kopaka does. I am not kidding when I called him, he's an icy guy with a heart of gold. Piccolo from Dragon Ball, they're kind of the same thing. They're characters who are like, they seem really serious, but deep down, they are the ones who are most concerned with those around them. And that's absolutely how Kopaka behaves in Mask of Light. It's why he's my favorite character. This new Kopaka, they portray him as a petulant child who slips on snow despite carrying snowshoes in his hands, and then I guess somebody, some like corporate executive heard that the Toho refer to themselves as brother and sister and were like, oh, they're siblings, right? That means they have to fight each other for absolutely no reason. This is what I mean when, they trot out things, the performative appearance of things that were popular while not understanding the deeper construction that made it popular to begin with. That is the importance of good writing. It's the importance of showmanship. It's the importance of understanding, not just appealing to an audience, but actually keeping the audience there. That's why I talk about things like slogans and hooks, ways to get people to, turn your head. You look at a lot of famous literature that have like really dynamite opening lines. Like a lot of people say that the opening line of your novel is really important. You have things like the best of times and the worst of times, or the dark man fled into the desert, the gunslinger followed closely behind, those things that really get people interested into what you have to say. This is why you have to make something that's, short and sweet, something that somebody can digest in a mere few seconds and be like, oh, what is that? Like, believe it or not, Universe of Legends, the folks who sponsored the last video, I've actually known these guys for a while. They're one of the people who shows up on the channel to show off their game. I first encountered them, months ago, and when they first introduced the game, they're like, okay, so your deck is like your entire universe, and I'm like, that's really cool. That's something that's stuck into my head. This thing is a whole universe. Wow, that kind of stuck in my head. And then when it actually came time to discuss the advertising, he didn't really have a slogan. I'm like, so what about your hand, your universe? And he's like, oh wow, that's a really cool idea. I really wish I'd thought of that. And I'm like, my brother in Christ, you literally did think of this. This is why we write things down. But yeah, you can kind of see how that tagline, your deck, your universe, it really works. Like, imagine if, I went to a booth and I plunked this into your hand and I said, hey, that thing you're holding, that is a whole universe there. I mean, it might bounce off of some people, but for some people, you might suddenly feel the weight. Like, this isn't just a deck, it's not just a library, it's a universe that's fighting to survive against universes that it's colliding with. And that's really how you get people to do it. That's and a mere sentence is free. If you can figure out a way to add up your game in a single sentence that has like an interesting sort of, a way to, that's just slightly ajar enough that people, pay attention and listen. It's like, oh wait, why is that sentence written that way? I should probably investigate further. Because people who play card games and stuff like this, and I admit this is the Timmy and me speaking, they like adventure. They like the idea that what they're getting into has a greater importance than, what might be on the surface, to actually enjoy getting into the fun. And like I said, it's not that difficult to do. You don't really need like a whole Yu-Gi-Oh show. I know a lot of people gave me grief that I was saying, oh, hey, here's a way to sell your game, and I'm talking about like a big expensive TV show. You don't have to do it that way. The Yu-Gi-Oh example I was giving was a writing lesson. Like, there is sort of a unique power in media based on something like a game, in that they can instruct players on how to play, reveal a bit of depth, and still deliver narrative satisfaction. Like, let's go to the examples I've talked about before. Like the first episode of Duel Monsters with Yami Yugi. He summons Exodia to destroy Kaiba. Now, these days, I would not say that's necessarily the best video on how to teach people how to play Yu-Gi-Oh, but it does at least give like the general like gist of how the game goes. We learn pretty quickly, the higher number wins, but the highest number isn't always important because there's things like spell cards that can twist things around. And at the end, the Kaiba, the guy who takes a sadistic glee over dominating and controlling people, has that control just plucked away from him out of nowhere by Yugi pulling the 5 pieces of Exodia, absolutely destroying his sense of control, even though he got all of his Blue Eyes White Dragons into play. It's incredibly narratively satisfying to see that guy get taken down a peg by what is arguably an act of divine vengeance. But let's face it, at the end of the day, Yami Yugi did not really win that game by having a plan. He won it by getting lucky. He had a little, faith, trust, and a bit of magic pixie dust. Yuma, on the other hand, had a plan. The reason I highlighted the Yuma episode so much is because it is an episode where Yuma actually comes up with a strategy to win. The game does not lose sight of the ball. It makes it very clear that Yuma will lose if he ends his turn. Literally, the end of his turn, he's going to lose all of his life points to a trap card, and it is game over. This is his one chance. And one of the things I like about the show, at least in the Japanese version of the dub, is you are given everything you need to understand how Yuma can get out of the situation, like a detective novel if you're paying close enough attention. And I gotta give guts to Yuma, including a card in his deck that, deals with negated attacks, even though that time Yu-Gi-Oh was about skipping the battle phase entirely rather than negating attacks. But you're given the pieces to solve the problem there. You can read the effects of Double or Nothing. You're told how Double or Nothing works. You can read the effects of Utopia. You're told how it works, but Yuma comes up with something a bit unintuitive to actually win. Because all right, I drew Double or Nothing, and now I'm going to have my weak monster attack your stronger monster. And everybody's like, what are you doing? And then Yuma's like, and then I'm going to use a Utopia's ability on itself to cancel its own attack. And everybody's like, what are you doing? And Yuma's like, I'm winning, that's what I'm doing. And then he activates Double or Nothing in order to win. And the cool thing about that is it's a little unintuitive to think that you could use Utopia's ability to negate an attack not just on one of your own creatures, but on Utopia itself. But you are allowed to do that. And that is the kind of clever, tricky play that gets the Mels and the Johnnies and the Spikes to really start thinking about the game. It's like, oh, so that is some depth. That's something interesting that this game can do. I might have to take a deeper look into that. And honestly, before I watched the episode, I did not really know that you could use Utopia's ability on your own creatures. And that is how you use highly situational cards in any of these games. You combine it with cards that trigger that very situation in order to make good use of them. That's how Yuma is able to use an otherwise worthless card like Double or Nothing, is by combining those together. And like I said, that's kind of the unique power of things like this. You could do this exact same thing with comic books. There are ways that you could do it in the form of a visual novel. I know D-Spirits kind of has a how to play video done as more like a visual novel, look, which is how so many of the tutorials back in the day did it, where the tutorials were like a couple of characters playing games against each other. There's one for Yu-Gi-Oh! There's one for Naruto. Of course, I've brought up the one for Accelerace a whole bunch. But to make it like actual characters from the game playing it, and then actually writing it in a narratively satisfying way. The one for D-Spirits, I don't think really does that, but it would not be too hard for the main character, I believe his name is Damien, to do a trick where he gets Gau into play like at the end of his opponent's turn and then uses that to win past his opponent's massively powerful Gengar. You know, that's kind of the power of a climax. So I actually took a look briefly at some other videos. This is actually something I'm considering doing on like my alternative channel, where I actually like take a look at other hobby anime that talk about trading card games and analyze them on, are they well done narratively? Do they deliver good gameplay? And do they make me want more? Pretty simple criteria, see how those work. But one of the ones I looked at was one called Shadowverse. Yes, the mobile game version of Shadowverse Evolve, and I'm sorry, that episode is terrible. First of all, it does establish stakes. The main character is trying to win back a stolen cell phone, but it loses sight of the ball really, really easily because the main character is proselytizing about how fun the game is rather than, you know, focusing on helping out his friend who's in trouble. It seems like really disrespectful and out of nowhere. Talking about how fun the game is, you know, like the twists and turns and stuff like that. That's the job of like a commentator or like a somebody like watching from the sidelines. That's not something that the main character should do when they're actually dealing with a serious situation. The other place where the Shadowverse anime absolutely blows it in episode 1 is doing the climax. Now, in order to do a satisfying narrative climax, a climax is like a car airbag. It's like it goes off and then it, you know, you get this big initial impact, but then it almost immediately begins to deflate. And pretty soon you have like a sad little empty bag hanging off of your steering wheel. So this is why in like Yu-Gi-Oh, once the big moment happens, the episode is basically over. The story ends. It does a little wrap up because, you know, the climax has been hit. Yay, we won the day. You see this in basically all of the more popular seasons. They have like just, you know, the turnabout moment that sets everything into play. In fact, with the one for Duel Monsters, the reason that was so memorable is because it actually like builds on the climax twice. Like you see Yugi is like, aha, I drew Exodia, and he sets out all the cards, and Kaiba's like, oh no, and then Exodia appears, and Kaiba's like, oh no, and then Exodia like just starts obliterating everything in front of it, and Kaiba fusion summons into Blue Eyes Ultimate. Oh no, that is how you do, you know, you just stack the climax, and then when Kaiba's defeated, you know, they have a few more seconds, and it's over. In the Shadowverse opening, the card that will turn everything around gets drawn and played, but then there's like 3 or 4 like really pathetic turns that follow up after this. Like his opponent summons one monster and basically passes for turn, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna kill you with the cards in my head at the next turn, I promise. I'm not gonna give him any context for that, but... And it just, you know, the climax basically ends. It just totally deflates. It's a great example of how to write things badly, and I think that might not be a bad time to parlay into something I call corpo speak, because we see so many of these big, expensive projects show up and then absolutely fall apart almost immediately. Even though they spent a lot of money on them, they kind of immediately bottom out. Nobody, you know, likes the concept. Nobody really understands it. And this is a product of poor showmanship, and so often it is the result of corporate meddling. So something I mentioned, one of the many things I tossed into this video as I was making it, was a concept called corpo speak, and this is where you like string a bunch of $10 words together to try to sound intelligent, you know, like leveraging advancement opportunities to optimize sales positions or something like that. You hear those kinds of lines all the time, and I hate them. I hear them. I see them all the time in people trying to pitch their card game. You know, it's like, oh, like difficulty, medium, genre, fantasy, action, things like that. That might be something you put in a catalog to sell a publisher, but it's not going to sell somebody on a game. I mean, would you describe a movie that way? You know, movie length, medium, complexity, high. No, you talk about what happens in the movie, right? When pitching your game, you need to talk about what happens in the game. You need to talk about the magical land of Huitzao and how the something-a-wutters live here to try to defeat the who's-a-ma-whatsits. And, you know, talk about the adventure that your players are basically going on. Like we've I've seen a lot of games that do a good job, like talking about how your deck is your universe. That has a sensation of adventure, right? And then you have like a deck that's outside of the universe, that's like this powerful being that can glimpse between, influencing the battles going on, and that's basically, your silent hand influencing the whole match. And that I've described a game mechanic, the reaction deck, which is a side deck you play with, similar to the Lurig deck in WeCross, but I've defined it as, basically actions taking place outside of the universe, sort of divine intervention that you get to control. And that is both a description of a game mechanic and the universe at large. And that is, like I said, it's another power that only these sorts of games have. It's another way to sort of get out under the thumb of corpo speak, because one thing about a lot of these folks who use those $10 words, they're charlatans, and they're using those words to try to convince you of how smart they are. The way you sell your game to people who are really get committed to it is to describe how the game plays, not use a list of items. I mean, you can start with a list, but like I said, during play tests, during demonstrations, write things down. If people give you like a visceral reaction to how a game is going, write that down. That is, important critique. It is also something that you can pull out of later. And that is, that's why you should pay attention, figuring out how to think a little bit like a salesman, because you are, promoting a brand now. Figure out what your powerful cards are. Ironically enough, I saw some comments where people said, oh, Magic never had to worry about that. Mere days after Ristic Studies released a video about how Wizards of the Coast had to worry about that. And everybody had to do it. Magic didn't really have many other games to compete with, but now there are like hundreds of card games going concurrently, and it pays to put some more effort into giving players a way to engage with your game that isn't just the cards themselves. It can be a website, it can be things that are fairly easy to put together, like comics, visual novels, things like that. Like there are generators to make visual novels in order to learn more about the world. This is how you generate fan art and cosplay and all that other fun stuff. So yeah, at the end of the day, my discussions about things like Yu-Gi-Oh! Were writing lessons. They're about how you can construct a good story that both explains your game and has a satisfying narrative arc. And you can render that story in a number of different ways. At the end of the day, that's really what this is about. It's about good narrative construction that uses the unique power of storytelling to explain not only how to play a game, but how to play the game well in ways you might not initially suspect. It would be a good way to, demonstrate expected play patterns and things like that. You can teach a lot of people a lot of things by telling them a good story about it. That was actually, there was a project in high school where you were teacher for a day to teach a lesson, and I wrote a comic book and just handed it out and said, class dismissed, and I got an A. But yeah, I think that's really all I have to say about that. If you want, like I said, if you look at like the old Bionicle commercials from back in the day, if you want to learn how to weave like a good narrative with like a compelling hook, a good narrative structure, look at those old Bionicle card advertisements. And that wasn't a joke. I really mean it. If you take a look at how those commercials are put together, they only have 30 seconds to sell you on this whole concept, and they do a really good job at hooking you in that you're not just buying a cool toy, but you're getting involved in an adventure and a story. And I think a lot of people really enjoy that feeling that not only are they, they're actually like bringing out their force and their influence upon a world by, demonstrating that there is, in fact, a good world to explore. Like, I've seen things as dry as furniture commercials, but what they do is they do like a little magic trick. Like, it's like, oh, like, hey, check out, it's a pretty cool sofa, and then they just, casually like flip it up and it's a double bunk bed, and it's like, whoa, that's the kind of thing that works as a hook. That's what a dose of showmanship can do to your game. It's like, you can have your critter start like this, but by the end it'll be like, whoa, with this big flashy artwork and stuff like that. It's a very visceral thing. Like, you kind of know it when you see it. Like, you pull off that little magic trick and the eyes like wide inside. It's like, oh, okay. If you explain your game to somebody, you get like that little, like, that sort of where their eyes like widen a little bit, that sort of, neuron activated body language, then you've gotten through to something like funny story. The Universe of Legends, the folks who I did an ad for, I think they're going to be actually going to be at a convention this coming weekend. I think they also, I don't know if they have plans for Gen Con or not, but they might. That's just how you do a good narrative hook. You give room for speculation. You use the story to tell people how to play. And I think I'm exhausting myself. So yeah, ideas for future videos with the rise of Nadu and stuff like that. Might not be a bad time to do a video about ban lists and when not to ban a card, because there is such a thing as banning something prematurely, banning something that wasn't really a problem. But it's a hot topic right now because Nadu is a card that creates like really unfun play patterns where you can basically advance your resources to turn 20 on turn 2, and everybody's saying it should be banned except for the people who printed the card. So it's complicated. But yeah, until next time, feel free to check out my Patreon. I've got, of course, the rest of this playlist you can check out. I'm like, if people want me to do analyses of like the first episode or like the first like storyline of something that's designed to sell like a card game or something like that, like I tried watching Build Divide, and it's just like, it's like, Mom, we have Wheatcross, Selector Infected Wheatcross at home. Like, modern Wheatcross is kind of garbage. Selector Infected was actually good. I'm happy to take a look at that. But yeah, until next time, keep those things in mind, and you too can build a better card game.